I knew that I needed a change in my life. I came into Lisbon and I was like, wow, I can't afford to live here. And every time I come into Lisbon, the privacy was very difficult. Yeah, the world is uncertain right now. And I think for me, it's nice to be outside of the chaos a little bit. This whole thing about so many Americans just like cockroaches coming in and like just taking over everything, I think is just really unrealistic. The reality of moving to any new country that's a different culture is not as glamorous and romantic as you think it is.
His controversial videos have amassed over 5 million views in the last 12 months. Dave in Portugal is an American who has moved to Portugal and has a thriving YouTube channel about living and exploring the country as a foreigner. He chose to integrate into Portuguese culture by avoiding a big city. It's not been completely smooth sailing. He bought a house, he's planting roots, and he's here to be real with you about what life could be like for you.
Dave, you've been in Portugal for almost 2 years, so what happened 2 years ago that you decided to leave the US?
It was right before the pandemic. Everything was about to close down as the world would know it. I didn't know this, obviously no one did. And I was working a job that I was rather unhappy with, I was chasing the, kind of 9 to 5 job, although it was like 8 to like 7 p.m.
Okay.
And sometimes 6 days a week. And basically, I was really unhappy. I was making good money. I was, saving money. There was more in the world that I wanted to experience. And I just wasn't satisfied with being under a company that was going to write my life for me, My dad and I had always had this dream to see the waves at Nazaré. We had watched Garrett McNamara surf the wave, and my dad was like, we gotta see this. We went through the whole pandemic, got laid off from my job, and basically, I knew that I needed a change in my life. And when we got quarantined and the whole entire lockdown and everything happened with COVID, I knew that I needed something different. And I had explored all of a lot of the national parks on the West Coast of the United States. And I knew that okay, my time in the United States has been amazing and I appreciate it so much, but I'm ready to do something else. And ever since I was around 19 years old, since I first visited Europe, I wanted to come back to Europe. It had always been a dream, and when COVID restrictions started to open up in Europe, I knew that this was a chance for me to see if it was possible. At the time, I was working as a video editor for different YouTubers, doing pretty well with the business that I had started during the pandemic for video editing and video stuff, and I could go and travel for a while. So me and my dad decided to buy a ticket to come to Portugal and to see Nazaré. And then I would continue the journey through the rest of Europe.
Okay.
Filming, documenting, possibly making a travel YouTube. It was all in the works. And then unfortunately the second wave, the Delta wave of COVID hit. My dad, is 74 at the time, decided not to come. Mm-hmm. He was concerned with health reasons. So I came by myself.
Okay.
So I showed up into Portugal for the very first time, landed in Lisbon, and had no idea what to expect.
But never with the thought of I'm going to move to Portugal. That was not on the radar at first.
No, it was not on the radar at all. It was going to be a stepping point to go to the rest of Europe. But I had always wanted to go to Lisbon because I felt like Portugal and Lisbon and the areas were kind of, to Americans, it's an uncharted place. I think for the people that I know that travel to Lisbon, you're kind of a hardcore traveler.
Yeah.
If you come to Europe, you're not coming to Lisbon. And that's still the case. Only recently amongst retirees and people did Lisbon even become on people's radar, or Portugal in general. Mm-hmm. I mean, most people think that Portugal is like an island off of Brazil in America.
Yeah.
I've actually I've had educated people in the United States tell me stuff that wild, So it is crazy. Obviously not educated enough to know that Portugal isn't an island off of, maybe not educated in geography, but however, so I had no means to move to Portugal. I came here and I was supposed to go all the way through Europe and do a Europe trip, and I ended up staying in Portugal the entire time.
You loved it so much.
I loved it so much, and I just felt like to me it was a blank canvas. It was a place where I could see so much upside and opportunity to it. An opportunity in the way where there was just so much to be discovered for me. It was a new world for me. I knew nothing in Portuguese. Everything was very foreign. So it was this beautiful kind of lost in translation thing where I was like, okay, this is so new, and I needed it so bad after being stuck in a bubble during the lockdowns in the United States for so long. So Portugal was this breath of fresh air. Then with the help of some Portuguese friends in the Algarve, we started chipping away at what the possibility was for me to get a visa here. That's when I became privy to the D7 visa, a passive income. And I'm not a retiree. I don't have a pension. I wasn't technically a remote worker, but I did have a company doing video work that could count as a passive income. And he said, dude, you can make it through this. The threshold is not what you think it is, like in Netherlands or in these places where barrier to entry is much more difficult.
Right.
And so I said, ooh, I think this is actually feasible and a possibility. Are we moving to Europe? Are we moving to Portugal?
Are we doing it?
So I'll never forget. I was sitting there in a miradouro in Lisbon, overlooking the city, Senhora do Monte, at the top of the hill. And I had this like moment where I said, I'm doing it. And I think I called one of my best friends and I called my mom and I said, I'm moving to Portugal. And I just like had this like, I'm doing it moment. You know,
and the rest is history.
And the rest is history.
Yeah.
And I came back to the United States, started looking into all the processes, watched your guys' videos. A lot of your guys' videos helped for scouting out a lot of the areas. So that was a big part of it. So started to put everything together and here I am. Yeah, 2 years later, got the residency permit, the D7, and I have to renew it next year. So.
Coming up. And so you've ended up in the Silver Coast. So you didn't, land in Lisbon and that's where you stayed. You decided after doing some research that the Silver Coast was for you.
Yeah, so Nazare's in the Silver Coast. So I always had this idea that I wanted to be close to Nazare, right? I went to the Algarve and it wasn't for me. I just felt like the energy of the local Portuguese people they didn't feel welcomed. I felt like a tourist. It's a very touristic area. A lot of people say like for the rest of Northern Europe, it's like the Cancun as Americans, there's a similarity to there. So yeah, I think that a lot of the locals were fed up by the constant tourism there and the tourists that were causing problems. 18-year-olds getting drunk for the first time from Northern Europe coming to Portugal and disrespecting the locals. So I think that was a big problem. I decided that's not going to be for me. I came to Lisbon and I couldn't afford it. I came into Lisbon and I was like, wow, I can't afford to live here. And every time I'd come into Lisbon, the privacy was very difficult. To find an apartment where your neighbors weren't making a bunch of noise, was insulated, there was a lot of things that just didn't work out for me. So I decided to go check out closer to Nazaré, and I looked in that entire area. You have Nazaré, Figueira de Foz above that. You have São Martinho do Porto, which is a very popular area amongst older retirees and expats right now from Canada and the United States. It's a beautiful place. And then you start to come south into the more younger driven areas because of the surf. And that would be Baleal and Peniche. These areas I don't think they're catered as well to retirees. They're a little bit rougher. Okay. It's a little bit more party-esque. Their village parties get raw. They get wild.
Do they?
People get crazy. They got fireworks. They got crazy stuff going on. They have young kids skateboarding and playing music, and it's perfect for me. I mean, I love it there. And it's an international community. People from Germany, people from Belgium, people from Netherlands, people from Australia. They come all around the world to surf Supertubos, which is where they do the World Surf League. So it's famous there. And you can learn to surf before you get to the big waves like in Nazaré. So it's this perfect storm of a lot of international people coming to surf in Portugal. So that zone really called to me. I really enjoyed that area. I thought it was great. And I think that that general area, if you're a younger person living the remote life, could work. Retirees, I think, work out a little bit farther north. I think São Martinho do Porto, Alcobaça, Leiria maybe, Caldas da Rainha, Óbidos has they're building a lot of expat facilities. They have golf courses, they have clubs. That's not my lifestyle, but a lot of people, they're building that infrastructure. Communities with gated communities, American style roads. These are things you can't find in Portugal. They do exist there. And the Algarve has a lot of that too. Yeah. But this is an area where these big like suburban subdivisions are being built a lot in these areas. So.
Okay, so this is really interesting because I think a lot of people think of Portugal and they go Lisbon, Porto, maybe Coimbra, Algarve, someplace like that. But you chose more of the Silver Coast with a bit of land, a bit of space. Yeah. And you chose that because you wanted to have a bit more of a farming, or you could do your own vegetables and stuff, or why did you choose that area?
Part of that was, we were coming out of the pandemic, and I think that in that time, people were like vacating cities. And so it was obvious that in a time of crisis, having like a little bit of property is a great way to be. And the uncertainty of having to be in another lockdown, I didn't want to be in an inner city with a lockdown. I wanted to be in a place where I could lay outside and have like the sun and kind of like have activities that are outside. I'm also a drummer. I'm also a musician. So it was really nice to be able to find a place where I could play drums.
Sure,
and that's
make noise.
really hard to do in the middle of cities unless you have so that was a big part of me. Another part of it was because I wanted the authenticity of being in a village like with Portuguese, amongst Portuguese people. A lot of people, I don't think, realize how big the population of in Portugal is in the older communities. And so, yeah, to be out in like rural Portugal is a great time to practice Portuguese, to feel kind of the pulse of the country, and to get a feel of like the real customs and traditions. That's kind of, and I feel like when I come into the city, that's recognizable. Okay. I think when I come here and young kids hear the way that I speak Portuguese and the phrases that I say and the things that I say, they say, wow, has experience with kind of like more of this authentic, like rural kind of, I feel that when I go into Lisbon, and some people are surprised.
Yeah.
I like that authenticity part. I like the ability to be able to live off the land and sustain it. My goal in the future is to have a house completely, sustained, by solar energy, and heated by elements, heat, water, radiators, underfloor heating. That's all based off of the elements, and maybe even like some wind. I've heard of personal wind stuff. I haven't looked into it as much, but I know some people that are doing it. So yeah, any ways that I want to look into how I can power the house and have it fully sustainable, and it could go off the grid. Yeah, if it needed to. If the power grid shut down, I could sustain there.
Yeah.
So I think that's a plus, because yeah, the world is uncertain right now. And I think for me, it's nice to be outside of the chaos a little bit.
Yeah.
But still, Portugal's so small that it's still really easy to get, stimulation fast. If you want to get into a big city, it's close. And because of the great transportation in Portugal, that's relatively good in Europe, I think it's really easy. Portugal's so small, it fits inside of, many states in the United States.
Yeah.
So for long drives for me on the west coast of the United States, driving from Lisbon to Porto is could be a daily jaunt.
Yeah, it's not bad at all.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's unpack a little bit of the Silver Coast, because you chose more of a rural area.
Yeah.
You don't live around many expats, so you get more of the local experience. Are there locals your age, or does it tend to be an older demographic where you live?
Yeah, there are locals my age, but a lot of the demographic my age moved. They either moved to pursue something professionally, go to school. But what's really interesting is that in this area, there are a lot of Portuguese my age that already left in their early 20s to go to school or do something professional, and they've come back with that money and they're buying houses.
Okay.
So you do see a lot of that happening in my area specifically, yeah.
Would you say that in most of the places you just named, it would be best to have a car? So if someone who's like saying, I want to move to Portugal, but I don't want to have a car, then Silver Coast is a little more difficult? Or
I think so. I think that's a great statement. Okay. I think that if you live in the Silver Coast area, you'll definitely be driving, which I think that is something that it's possible that you didn't. There are buses that come out of Leiria, Caldas da Rainha, they come out of Figueira de Foz, and you could be connected. But to do all your daily activities and how it all works, it's not like a city like Lisbon or Porto where there's trams connected and everything. So I think having a car is important in those areas, but with the cost of fuel in Portugal and the cost of tolls, especially in that area, I do think that that's something that people should definitely consider.
Okay. All right. So that's good to know. All right. So let's shift a little bit and talk about, this is where you live, Silver Coast area, and you're doing the rural thing, but what are you doing for work? And have you met anyone around doing the same thing for work that's your age, or what are the people doing that are around you that are your age?
You're looking at it. No. Yeah. So basically, I've been doing videos since I was a really young kid, since I was like 13. I'd been doing videos since I was like 5 years old on my handy cam. But when I was 13 is when I actually went to school, did a cinema class in school for it. So that's beginning my video editing journey. And I moved to Los Angeles, and I started doing a lot of video editing in Los Angeles when I needed to make money as a starving musician.
Okay.
So video editing was always something that I loved to do and something that I had a passion for. I still do video editing with clients in marketing for YouTube stuff, for Instagram, for websites. So anything that has to do with marketing and video stuff, I can cover. Yeah, it's been more important for me to be able to help people have an authentic experience when coming to Portugal and relay that in a little bit more of a modern way through video editing, through something. I think that in Portugal, the resources can be a little bit dated sometimes. Because there's a lack of younger, and professional people that are helping people come to Portugal or educate them about Portugal. I think that I saw that here as something that really needed to be done.
Okay.
And there's a lot of Portuguese people here that are also like, hey, this is great. Because there's a lot of communities in Portugal, as I was talking today with the barista at the coffee shop, that need tourism like so bad. When I go to some of these villages, they're like, please make a video about my village. Okay. We need people to come here. They're only going to Lisbon and Porto, and we need help.
Yeah.
Like our shops need help.
Yeah.
There's places in Alentejo, there's places in the middle of the country where it's a completely polarized story than you're hearing like from the Lisbon and Porto cities where everything is rising so much.
Right.
So it's interesting. This drives the Portuguese people into the interior a little bit more. And some of those areas, it would be, I think that a lot of these villages would really appreciate if some of the tourists would come, spend their money there.
So that's interesting. You think the overall sentiment in some of these smaller places is that they're welcoming to tourism and maybe expats moving there, or what is your feel on how Portuguese are perceiving Portugal now? People call it a hot spot, whether it's a hot spot or
Sure.
not, of people to move here. What are you seeing, since you are around more locals and locals your age as well, about people moving to Portugal? What are they saying?
Yeah, so for me, it's kind of like, I'm kind of like this weird phenomenon in my village, right? I think people are looking at me like, this is really weird, It's like kind of like, so I can't speak for Portuguese people because I don't know exactly what everybody's thinking. But when I go to villages and when I come into more rural areas and I attempt to speak Portuguese and attempt to, be respectful and say the things that they're used to hearing, so it deflects, that I'm just like, hey, I'm here, just to
take over or
take
something.
over, yeah.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of rural areas, there is an acceptance. Now, I think this changes from north to south. Almost every village and every place I've come to in the north has been extremely welcoming. Here in Porto, it just feels like the communities here kind of are like happy that, they're happy to meet an outsider that's interested in Portugal. And you have a polarizing version of that in Lisbon. I think that Lisbon, because of it's become this massive thing that's publicized all over the world, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that comes with that. And so it's you get kind of the good with the bad.
Right.
And I think that a lot of the villages that you travel a long way to get to, you will meet a lot of people that are really happy that you decided to come. And they're really proud to teach you about it.
Yeah.
They're really proud to teach you about the history of, their small town. Yeah. And I think that it's awesome.
Yeah, and I think you had some really good advice, because sometimes people are like, I want to move to Portugal, but I'm seeing all these things of the Portuguese being upset about it, or, I don't want to come and make a big, riff. So what you could do is be respectful of the country that you're in, and then also learning the language is so helpful, right? And
Big
to
time.
be able to connect with the locals and
Sure.
show that you're trying. You're not just coming to try to make a change or something.
Yeah, you can't please everybody. There are people that are going to be upset of your presence being there. Mm-hmm. It's how it works sometimes. But for every person that's like that, you have another person that's going out of their way to help you. Yeah. And so that's how it's been my whole entire experience in Portugal is, some people don't even have the time and want to deal with me, which is totally fine, I understand. And then some people are going out of their way and bending over backwards to help, which is awesome. And the other thing, when it comes to Americans coming to Portugal, I still have a really hard time believing that it's like really what these media outlets make it out to be. Mm-hmm. There's only around 10,000 Americans in Portugal. You guys are probably the third Americans that I've ever met. I haven't met a ton. So this whole thing about so many Americans, like just like cockroaches coming in and like just taking over everything, I think is just really unrealistic. And I think I just believe that the American culture, as I've made in many of my videos, does not work for majority in Portugal. I think it's close to 95%, maybe higher, of Americans that living in Portugal wouldn't work for them. The pure modernization of how United States is, of how everything's strip malls and everything's all perfectly laid out and modern, and it's all subdivisions. I think that Americans like expect that and want that as a comfort when they go other places.
Yeah.
And so the oldness, you have to be a certain type of person to be able to adapt to a place like this. And I think that most Americans would have a hard time living in this world for long term.
Yeah.
And I think the bureaucracy and the different challenges that come along, it takes a person with a lot of endurance and patience to be able to endure this. And I think that majority of Americans don't have it in them. I really do.
Gotcha. And you said earlier that you saw that you wanted to help people with this type of journey. If that was something they wanted to do, you wanted to inform them. So that's kind of how the channel started. And let's talk about your channel and what kinds of things you talk about on there.
Yeah, so my goal with my channel has always been to give an authentic representation of Portugal. I started in the beginning like doing stuff that was like typical, where I'm like, I'm moving to Portugal and I'm so excited about it. But then as I got here, I was like, okay, the reality of moving to any new country that's a different culture is not as glamorous and romantic as you think it is. You think you just touch down and they have like wine ready for you and bread and cheese, which is true. There's wine and bread.
Have it.
They have it. You have to pay for it. It's like, but I think that, I think the reality of leaving your friends and family behind, selling all your stuff, taking this huge risk is, it's a big thing. And so for me, I wanted to document this experience to show the transition of me coming here. And so, so my more recent videos, I wanted to give a very honest representation of what it's like to be an American living in Portugal. And some of that, it's the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
And that's everywhere. That's everywhere in the world. I think that no matter where you live, even if you have this romantic, I always want to live in Japan. But I bet by year 2, I would have so many problems with like certain things in Japan that is just outside of my culture, as would a Japanese person living in America.
Right.
If a Portuguese person comes to America, they would feel the same thing. They'd be like, "Why are your roads so big? Like, why are the lanes
cars are so big?
Like, why are you, why do you guys, eat, this kind of like hamburgers all the time,
Or at 6 p.m.
Yeah,
right?
6 p.m. What are you guys
6?
eating so early? Yeah.
Yeah.
The reason I started this channel was to give an authentic representation of what living in Portugal really looks like, and then I wasn't prepared that a lot of Portuguese would start to watch the channel as well. So that's a really interesting one, that Portuguese people like to tune in and see what other foreigners are saying about their country.
Right, because sometimes I think people might think you talk about controversial things or the way you present it.
Sure.
So do you have issues with that for expats, locals?
Yeah, I think that so YouTube is unfortunately a clickbait, like reel you in like platform. That's what if you want to have success on YouTube, there's really no way around it unless you've been doing it for years and you just have like this massive like following, right? But in the beginning times, if you want to build a channel and get people to tune into your channel, you have to play that game. It's unfortunate, but every big YouTuber plays that game. And I hope that people tune into the channel and realize the time and effort and carefulness that I put into when I speak of the Portuguese culture. It's not just an American frustrated with Portuguese stuff. It may look like that from clickbait stuff, but it's kind of advice of like, hey, this is what you're gonna go through moving to Portugal, and you need to have the patience and tools to be able to articulate that without like blowing up and just, looking like a jerk.
Yeah. So finding the value in the information that's out there.
If you watch the video, you see that there's more depth in the content and more, hopefully.
Yeah. No, that's great too. It's like, so someone can actually really dive a little deeper into Portuguese culture, locals, because like you're in that more so than some other people who like, like us, we live in Porto, so it's a bigger city and we have a
Sure.
bit more international scene here. But you live more around, Portuguese people, so you have a little bit of a different
Sure.
opinion
Yeah.
on things. So it's
Sure,
good to
sure.
see that as well.
Yeah, and I think that Portuguese people appreciate me representing that. I think that Portuguese people are really proud of their heritage and where they've come from. And I think that they really like to be represented correctly. And that, as my channel goes on, is something that I'm learning more about and something that I am going to continue to do as well as I can. Being able to document it and give it to Camões, English-speaking people, and kind of get it out to people is something that's rare here. It's rare to have a well-documented, insight into the old traditions and the crazy history that is in such a small country is crazy. Mm-hmm. I mean, the amount of history that's here is it just never ends. I mean, you go 5 miles in a different direction and you're just completely like in a whole new world. Mm-hmm. That's the crazy thing about Portugal. It's so small, but it feels like you're in different worlds everywhere that you go. Yeah, I hope that people, when they watch the channel, will also have fun with me, because I have a lot of sarcasm in my, in my YouTube. I want to have fun. Mm-hmm. If it's not fun for me, I won't do it anymore.
Right.
I'm not my first thing is not providing a service. My first thing is entertainment. I'm having fun. And if people, if people just want a service out of me, they should maybe look elsewhere.
Okay.
I will provide some help and some services maybe along the road. But for right now, my channel is entertainment. It should be fun. And I think that comparing two cultures, I think is fun. I think it's part of why we do it. My idea has never been to, pit two cultures against each other. But there is idiosyncrasies and funny things that from having fun with that, I think it makes it part of the experience. If you're interested in things about Portugal or the rest of Europe, I'm going to be doing videos just traveling around and trying to give the most authentic experiences on the ground. My videos are intended to capture what it feels like to just be here. I feature locals that are everyday people that are just living their lives. And I want to give people like an honest representation of what just being here is like.
So make sure you head over to Dave in Portugal to see those types of videos, and Josh and I will be on his channel as well. So subscribe there, and don't forget to subscribe to Expats Everywhere right here as well. Now let's get moving.